Epilogue. Part 2 in Red Dead Redemption. 2 is often remembered for its action and the long-awaited closure it gives John Marston, but beneath the gunfights and the final confrontation, it's also a quiet reflection on everything the von der Linde gang once stood for, and everything they ultimately destroyed. What makes this section so powerful is how it blends John's personal growth with the inescapable consequences of the gang's downfall, showing both what went right and what tragically went wrong. And even though this is technically the end of the story, it's really the moment where the truth of the gang becomes fully visible. The first thing that went right in Epilogue Part 2 is the development of John into a man who finally understands the cost of his past. Building the ranch at Beecher's Hope isn't just a side activity. It represents John's attempt to create something real, something stable, something the gang talked about for years but never achieved. As the buildings go up, you can almost feel John stepping out of Dutch's shadow. For once, he's working not for a charismatic leader, not for survival, but for a future with Abigail and Jack. This is the first time in the entire story where John's decisions are fully his own, and that independence is something Arthur always wished for him. Epilogue. Part 2 shows the impact of Arthur's final plea. Be better. And John really is trying. But even as John builds his home, you can feel what went wrong with the von der Linde gang haunting him. Every piece of lumber he lifts is a reminder that the gang never built anything real. Dutch preached loyalty, freedom, and a new life, but he never laid a foundation, literally or figuratively. The gang lived from score to score, constantly running, constantly reacting, constantly relying on Dutch's promises about one last job. In contrast, John creating Beecher's Hope shows what the gang could have been if they had ever stopped running long enough to build a future. Instead, Dutch cultivated chaos, paranoia, and instability. The gang could steal, fight, and flee well, but they couldn't survive peace. That failure follows John into the epilogue like a ghost. Another thing that Epilogue Part 2 reveals is how the world has fully shifted into modern order. The government is stronger, the Pinkertons are relentless, and the old outlaw life is almost extinct. This is something Dutch never accepted. While the world evolved, Dutch clung to an outdated vision, convinced that he could outsmart civilization forever. Epilogue. Part 2 proves how wrong he was. When John takes legitimate work, applies for a bank loan, and deals with property rights, it's clear that the world Dutch tried to resist has already won. Civilization didn't just catch up to the gang, it completely overtook them. And the tragedy is that Dutch's refusal to accept change is exactly what destroyed the people who trusted him. But even with all his progress, John can't escape the consequences of the gang's collapse. His past drags him back into violence, not because he wants it, but because Micah, one of Dutch's greatest mistakes, is still alive. Micah is the embodiment of everything that went wrong with the gang: manipulation, selfishness, greed, and betrayal. When John sets out to hunt Micah, he's not doing it as an outlaw desperate for survival. He's doing it as a man who wants closure. Dutch protected Micah for too long, ignored the warnings from Arthur and others, and that decision cost the gang everything. Chasing Micah in Epilogue. Part 2 is John confronting Dutch's final failure. And when John reaches that snowy mountain and finds Dutch standing beside Micah, it's the moment where every wrong choice the gang ever made comes crashing together. Dutch's silence, his confusion, his guilt, it all shows how hollow his leadership has become. The man who once preached about loyalty and family ends up in a standoff between the last two people who still reflect his legacy. When Dutch finally shoots Micah, it shows that even he can't deny what Micah truly was, but his decision to walk away afterward proves something else. Dutch lost himself long before the gang fell apart, and he can't come back from it. In the end, what went right is John finally breaking free, building a home, and confronting the last piece of his past. What went wrong is how the gang fractured under Dutch's obsession, Micah's influence, and the inability to adapt to a changing world. Epilogue. Part 2 isn't just a conclusion, It's the final verdict on the Linde gang. They dreamed big, fought hard, and believed in a future they never built.